Hello everyone, welcome to Winners English. I brought an article from the New York Times published on May 21st. How no tax on tips would affect waiters, drivers, and diners. Proposed changes making their way through Congress would benefit many employees, but some details are still in flux. As a slogan, in last year's presidential campaign, no tax on tips was short, memorable, and effective. As tax policy, it's more complex. On Tuesday, the Senate unanimously passed the No Tax on Tips Act, following through on a vow made by both President Trump and former Vice President Kamala Harris to give tipped workers a tax break on gratuities. As of now, the tax break is being incorporated into the One Big Beautiful Budget Bill being negotiated by House Republicans, which would be effective from 2026 through 2028. How would these changes affect food industry workers and diners? Here's what we have learned from interviews with tax lawyers, hospitality professors, and industry groups. How are restaurant employees currently taxed on tips? The federal tax code requires that every tip be reported as income. Whether it's a $20 bill handed to a host, a line filled in on a check, or a button pressed on a keypad, employees and employers are required to track and report every cent. This applies whether each worker keeps the tips or the money is pulled and redistributed. What counts as a tip? In the tax code and in this legislation, the term cash tip applies to tips given in bills and coins on a credit or debit card or via business electronic payment system. It has not yet determined whether tips that go directly to a server via services like Venmo or PayPal would qualify as cash. Service charges, which are legal in some places, are added by the business and do not count as tips. What is the proposed change? Under the legislation being negotiated in the House, tip income would be exempt from federal income taxes. That amount would be subtracted from reported income as an above-the-line deduction on tax return. That would reduce how much income tax is owed. The tips would still have to be tracked and reported. Who would get the deduction? There is debate over who would benefit from the measure, which applies to all tipped workers in the restaurant business, including not only servers, but also baristas, food delivery drivers, and anyone holding out a payment screen after they have sold you food. According to the government data, there are more than 2 million tipped restaurant workers in the United States. How would this affect restaurant employees? It would put more money in the pockets of tipped workers, like servers and bartenders, who interact directly with customers. Those employees would be able to deduct up to $25,000 in tips unless they earned more than $160,000 in a year. The amount will rise over time. Does this affect the tipped minimum wage? No. The federal minimum wage is $7.25 per hour. Many states and cities have higher ones. Employers have been allowed to pay tipped workers just $2.13 of that sum since 1991. They can pay the lower wage only when the employee's tips bring the total up to minimum wage. Those tips are also subject to income tax. Would the change result in customers being asked to tip in more places? Not necessarily. The measure applies only to employees who are customarily tipped, to be determined by the Treasury Department. Making tips tax-free might motivate business to encourage tipping in order to retain employees who are chasing this deduction. It would be unlikely to reduce tipping prompts or the growing trend of tipping on more services. How much of my tips goes directly to the server? That depends on workplaces and local laws. Some restaurants allow servers to keep all their tips. Others require tip pooling, which share the money with bursars, bartenders, and other staff members. This bill would not change who receives tips or how they are distributed. Does tipping in cash make a difference? Not for tax purposes. It does reduce a restaurant credit card processing fees, which are charged as a percentage of the total bill, about 2% to 3.5% of each transaction, and sometimes a 30 cents swipe fee. But it doesn't leave a paper trail for the employee or employer to track, which can increase the risk of tax fraud. Some cash tips go unreported, which is considered tax evasion, but the scale of the problem has never been determined. Would this change federal rules that prevent kitchen workers from receiving tips? No. So-called back-of-the-house employees, including chefs, cooks, dishwashers, and porters, cannot receive any tips unless they participate in a legal tip pool. There are federal regulations that govern tip pools, and some provisions vary state by state. Would tip continue to count as a payroll for federal tax purpose? Yes. In addition to withholding employees' contribution for Medicare, Social Security, FICA, and unemployment, employers must pay tax for those programs based on the employee's total wages, which includes tips. Will employers of tip workers continue to get a tip credit? The tip credit, officially called the 45B tax credit, helps employers of tipped employees by reducing their tax bill. They receive a credit for a portion of the Medicare and Social Security tax they pay on tip wages that exceed the $7.25 an hour federal minimum wage. The proposed legislation would expand that credit to beauty businesses like salons and spas, but the restaurant portion would stay the same. Alright, thank you so much for watching my video. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.